The day Eli came into this world, it felt more like a funeral than a birth. My daughter Cynthia was 20, and spiraling jobless, angry, running with a crowd that promised nothing but dead ends. She didn't want the baby. She made that clear from the moment the stick turned blue. "I can't do this. Mom," she told me, eyes bloodshot, voice hard like it had forgotten how to be soft. "Don't expect me to change. I'm not meant for this." And she didn't change. Even after giving birth, she refused to hold him, refused to name him. I remember the nurse asking who would be taking the baby home. Cynthia didn't even blink. "My mother," she said as though I'd volunteered. I hadn't. But I also hadn't hesitated. I named him Elijah. Eli. It was the name of my father, a good man, a quiet man, someone who held family above everything. I thought naming him after my father would give him a foundation, a sense of being wanted. That first night with him curled in a bassinet I borrowed from a neighbor, I sat awake in the armchair by the window watching the moonlight paint shadows on his tiny face. His breath was soft, his fingers curled into tight little fists, like he was already bracing against the world. "I've got you," I whispered. "You'll never be alone." I meant it with every fiber of my being. My husband Gerald had passed just 4 months earlier, lung cancer stage of 4. I'd retired early from teaching to care for him through chemo, hospital visits, hospice. By the end, I was hollow. The silence in the house had become unbearable. Every room echoed with memories that made me crumble. Eli gave me something to pour my love into again, something to fight for. I used what was left of our savings to baby-proof the house-buy formula, a crib, diapers. I applied for legal guardianship and got it, no thanks to Cynthia. She vanished not long after signing the paperwork, as if she'd handed me a sack of groceries instead of her own child. Raising a baby at 52 isn't easy. I was tired. My back ached more than it used to. But I found joy in the quiet mornings, spooning mashed bananas into Eli's mouth, singing lullabies while folding laundry, sitting on the porch swing with him against my chest, both of us swaying with the breeze. He was mine in every way that mattered. I never told Eli the full story of how he came to live with me. Not at first. How could I? He was just a child. I figured one day when he was old enough to understand, I'd explain. For now, I let him believe the world was safe, that he was chosen, not abandoned. He called me Nana. He said it like it was magic. Every year on his birthday, I baked him the same chocolate cake with little blue sprinkles even when he outgrew sprinkles. We had our rituals: Friday night puzzles, Sunday pancakes, the smell of cinnamon on the stove, his laughter echoing down the hallway that was my happiness. He was bright too. Too bright. By 5, he was reading chapter books. By 10, he was helping the neighbors' kids with math. Everyone told me, "He's going to make you proud, Maggie." I already was. But I saw the signs before I wanted to. Teenagers change, sure. But Eli didn't just grow quiet, he started asking questions. "Why don't I look like you? Why don't I have a dad? Why don't we talk about Mom?" Each time I offered something true, but not whole. "Your mom had a hard time. She wasn't ready. But she loved you." A lie. I don't think Cynthia ever loved anything beyond the next thrill. And maybe that's where I made my first mistake, shielding him from that truth. I thought I was protecting him. But in time, it became the gap someone else could fill. When he was 16, he found her online. I remember the day. He came home from school, backpack half-zipped, eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. She messaged me, he said, breathless. "Mom, she found me." My chest went cold. "She wants to meet. Just coffee." She said she wants to explain. I wanted to scream, to tell him she'd explain nothing, that all she'd do was twist and charm and lie. But instead I said, "You're old enough to decide. Just be careful, sweetheart." That was my second mistake. They met. Then they met again. And again. I could feel the tide shifting, subtle at first. He started questioning me more. Did you keep her away from me? Why didn't you let her raise me? Did you take her rights? I told him the truth. She signed them away. Voluntarily. But I could see in his eyes that her version had already embedded itself like rot beneath paint. One night I heard him on the phone in his room. I only caught fragments. She said Nana kept me for herself, that she manipulated everything. I pressed my hand against the door and felt my heart sink. I had raised him with nothing but love. I had stitched together a childhood with threadbare finances and late-night tears, built him a world where he was wanted, cherished, guided. And now the seed of doubt had been planted and Cynthia was watering it. You don't think someone you love could ever see you as the villain. But I learned that even the purest love can be rewritten when someone whispers just the right poison into the ears of the person you raised. And that was only the beginning. The first time I saw Eli look at me like I was a stranger, it broke something in me that never quite healed. He was 17 then. Tall, lean, quiet like always, but different. The softness in his eyes had hardened. He'd always been introverted, sure, but never cold. Now there was a distance I couldn't cross no matter how many meals I cooked, no matter how many times I asked how his day was. The boy who used to fall asleep with his head on my lap while we watched old cartoons now barely spoke to me unless I asked first. I told myself it was just the age. Teenagers pull away. That's normal. But it wasn't just age. It was Cynthia. After their first few meetings, she inserted herself fast. Too fast. Suddenly, Eli had a second phone. He was disappearing on weekends. He started asking strange questions about the deed to the house, about whether I had savings, about what would happen if something happened to me. At first, I brushed it off as curiosity. Maybe they were having big conversations about the future. But then I found the crumpled paper in the trash, a printout of a form to transfer property ownership. It had my name on it. And Eli's. When I confronted him, he looked at me like I was the one hiding something. "It's just research," he said flatly. "Mom said you might want to think about the future, like inheritance planning." I stared at him, unsure what to say. That was a conversation for people who trusted each other, not people who now stood on opposite ends of a sentence with landmines in between. "I'm not dying," I said quietly. "I didn't say you were." But it was already done. A crack had opened. I began to notice how Cynthia was weaving herself in tighter. She started calling the house not often, but often enough. Sometimes she'd leave messages on the machine when she knew I'd hear them. "You know, Maggie, we really should talk about what's fair," she'd purr. "Eli's getting older. He deserves to know the full truth. About everything. Everything she'd never lifted a finger in his childhood. Not one diaper, not one doctor's visit. And now she wanted to rewrite history in her favor. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want Eli to see me as bitter. But I was. Bitter, yes, and scared. Scared that this woman who had abandoned him so easily would find a way to take him back now that he was nearly grown. But more than that, I was scared that he'd let her. By the time Eli turned 18, he was still living with me technically, but emotionally he had drifted. I'd come home from grocery shopping and find him gone. No note, no text. He'd come home late sometimes after midnight, reeking of cologne I didn't recognize, and wearing clothes I didn't buy. He wasn't disrespectful exactly, but indifferent. Like I was the landlord, not the woman who had wiped his tears and held him through nightmares. Then one day, out of the blue, he said Mom wants to take me on a trip. Just a few days. A trip I didn't even know they were that close. I kept my voice even. "Where to?" He shrugged. "Out west. California, maybe." She said she's thinking about relocating. Relocating, I swallowed the knot in my throat. "Do you want to go?" He looked at me and something in his eyes flashed guilt, excitement I couldn't tell. "I think I should." And just like that, he was gone for a week. When he came back, everything changed. Eli sat me down at the kitchen table like he was the adult and I was the child. His voice was calm but practiced, like he'd rehearsed what he wanted to say. Nana, he began, I've been thinking a lot about the future, about where I want to live, what I want to do. Of course, I said gently, trying not to tremble. You're a young man now. He nodded. Right. And I think it's time we talk about the house. I blinked. What about it? Well, he said, adjusting his sleeves like he was in a business meeting, Mom thinks it would make more sense if the house were in my name, since I'll be taking care of it eventually. It's just paperwork. Nothing changes. I stared at him. This house is mine, I said. I bought it with your grandfather. I raised you here. It's not just paperwork. He looked uncomfortable. But you said you wanted to leave it to me anyway. When I die. Yes. He paused. Why wait? It felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. Because I'm not dead, I said slowly. And because I don't need to be managed. Eli stood. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, I said, rising to face him, you did. That night, I sat in the dark for hours. I didn't cry. I was too stunned. Too numb. My own grandson, my Eli, wanted my house signed over like it was a game piece. And I knew where the idea had come from. Cynthia. She saw my home the only stability Eli had ever known as a target. Something she could finally take from me after years of distance. She couldn't take back the years, but she could take what I'd built in them. I didn't know whether to blame her for manipulating him or blame myself for raising him to be so easily manipulated. The next few days were quiet. Eli avoided me. I avoided confrontation. I thought maybe he'd come around. Maybe he'd see how cruel it was to ask what he did. But instead, I found a document on the kitchen counter one morning, a property transfer agreement. Unsigned, but waiting. I walked into his room with it trembling in my hands. What is this? I asked. He didn't even look up from his phone. Just think about it, Nana. That's all I'm asking. But that wasn't all. It was the beginning. The beginning of a betrayal so slow, so deliberate that I didn't even see the knife until it was already buried in my back. And still, I told myself I could fix this, because when you've raised someone since their first breath, you don't want to believe they'll be the one to steal your last ounce of peace. But I was wrong, and Cynthia was just getting started. I tried to pretend things were fine after that, or at least salvageable. I told myself Eli was just confused, caught between the past and the pull of a mother who'd never earned her title. That's what people do when they're scared of the truth. They rationalize. They cling to illusions. But I wasn't fooling anyone, especially not myself. I knew the boy I raised like a son was slipping away, and I knew I couldn't reach him anymore. The house got quieter. Our conversations grew shorter. We used to laugh over coffee in the mornings. Now he took his mug and disappeared into his room. I cooked dinner like always, but most nights the plate I left on the counter went untouched. I stopped knocking. I stopped asking. I just observed. The silence had a weight to it. It pressed on my chest like grief. I'd lost people before: my husband, my mother, even friends to time or illness. But this was a different kind of loss. A living one. And I began to wonder which hurt more: losing someone to death, or watching someone choose to walk away from you slowly, deliberately, while you're still breathing. One Thursday evening, I came home from the pharmacy and found Cynthia sitting on my porch. She looked like a stranger dressed in familiarity. Same blonde waves, same confident smirk, but her eyes were colder now, sharper. She stood when she saw me, arms crossed like she'd been waiting to pounce. Nice place, she said, glancing at the flower pots I'd tended for years. Could use a new coat of paint, though. I didn't answer. I walked right past her to unlock the door. I'm here to talk, she said. Then make an appointment next time. I don't do ambushes. She laughed, a short, condescending sound. Oh, come on, Mom. We're both adults now. No need to play the martyr. I turned hands, trembling slightly. You lost the right to call me that when you left your baby with me and disappeared for 17 years. Her expression didn't even flicker. Funny, she said, because Eli tells me you never tried to contact me, never even told him the truth. I protected him, I snapped, from you. And now, she said, walking up to me, slowly, voice syrupy and dangerous, you're the one he needs protection from. My mouth went dry. What are you talking about? She leaned in. He's an adult now. He can make his own decisions. And guess what? He's decided to take control of his life. That includes what's rightfully his. I stared at her, disbelief choking me. This house isn't his. I bought it. I raised him in it. I've sacrificed for every brick. She smiled. But legally, it's not so black and white anymore, especially if he presses for it. I felt the blood drain from my face. There it was. Not just the threat, the plan. Get off my porch, I said, voice shaking but low. You're not welcome here. She didn't argue. She didn't even look offended. She just turned, descending the steps with slow, confident strides. Oh, she added, glancing over her shoulder, and by the way, expect a visit from someone soon. We're just getting started. A week later, I got the first official notice. A manila envelope, certified mail. Inside, a letter from a lawyer. Polite, professional, venomous. It outlined potential discussions around voluntary property transfer and hinted very delicately at possible legal recourse if I refused to cooperate. I nearly dropped it. I sat in the kitchen reading it over and over as if repetition would change the words. They were asking me, no pressuring me, to sign over the only thing I had left. My home. My sanctuary. The place where Eli had taken his first steps. Where Gerald and I had built a life. And worst of all, it wasn't a stranger asking. It was my own flesh and blood. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have the money for a drawn-out legal fight. But more than that, I didn't have the strength, not after everything I'd given. I sat in that kitchen for hours, tea going cold beside me until the light outside dimmed to dusk. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found Eli sitting on the porch sipping coffee like nothing had happened. I stepped out slowly. He didn't look up. I got the letter, I said quietly. Still no reaction. You really went through with it. He finally turned to me. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was blank. It's just paperwork, Nana, he said. It doesn't have to mean anything personal. My heart broke right there. Not because he was taking legal action, but because he'd convinced himself it wasn't personal. That this betrayal could somehow exist in a vacuum. I raised you, I whispered. I gave you everything. I put your name on that paperwork years ago for protection. Not for this. You don't trust me, he asked, voice suddenly sharp. I blinked. I trusted you with my life. That's the problem. He stood up, eyes hard. You always wanted control. You always treated me like I was yours to shape, to hold back. Maybe Mom's not perfect, but at least she sees me as my own person. I was too stunned to speak. He walked past me down the steps, not even waiting for a goodbye. That was the moment I knew. I had lost him. Not to drugs, not to death, not even to time. I had lost him to her, the woman who had abandoned him, and she had finally come back. To finish what she started. I used to think I'd already lived through the hardest part of my life, losing Gerald to cancer, raising a child when I was supposed to be preparing for retirement, watching my own daughter disappear into addiction and bitterness. Those were the storms I thought I'd survived, and I told myself that surviving meant the worst was behind me. But no one tells you that the real heartbreak sometimes comes later, after you think the house is built, the garden grown, the family healed. That betrayal can show up with familiar eyes and the voice of someone you once rocked to sleep. It had been a week since Eli walked off my porch, leaving me with a stack of legal papers and a knot in my stomach that hadn't untied since. I hadn't seen him since that day, hadn't heard a word from him. No calls, no texts, just silence. A silence loud enough to fill every room in this house. I tried to keep moving. I busied myself with chores, errands, anything to distract me from the echo of footsteps that no longer came down the hallway. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Cynthia wasn't the type to wait long. And I was right. It started small, like rot beneath the floorboards. My neighbor Janet stopped me outside one morning, clutching her grocery bag awkwardly. "I don't mean to meddle, Maggie," she said softly, "but I ran into your daughter at the market yesterday. She, well, she was saying some things." I knew the tone. That cautious, hushed voice people use when they're trying to tell you something awful gently. "What things?" Janet hesitated. "Just that she's concerned about Eli. That maybe you've been controlling. She said you're not letting him make adult choices. That you're clinging too tightly. That you've isolated him." I stared at her. My hands tightened around the basket I was holding until my knuckles went white. She said that Janet looked embarrassed. I didn't want to believe it, of course. But you know how gossip is around here. It spreads. Of course I knew. And Cynthia was feeding it. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing the shift. People who used to greet me with warmth now offered polite nods and quick escapes. Someone from the church board called to ask if I needed support, the tone so thick with subtext I could barely breathe through it. And then came the final blow. A social worker showed up at my door. She was young, kind-eyed, holding a clipboard and wearing that neutral smile they're trained to maintain no matter what hell they're about to drop on you. "Ms. Alden, we received a tip regarding possible emotional coercion involving your grandson. We're required to do a home visit." I stared at her. Emotional coercion. She nodded gently. "We understand he's legally an adult now, but if there are concerns about undue influence, it still warrants a wellness review." I let her in. What choice did I have? She looked around my modest house, took notes, asked questions. "Has Eli ever indicated he felt unsafe or unable to make decisions independently?" "No," I said, my voice shaking. "He was raised with love. And now he's just gone." She asked to see his room. It was exactly as he'd left it, posters still on the walls, books half read on the nightstand. She took her notes, thanked me for my time, and left. I watched her car pull away, knowing Cynthia had orchestrated it all, every word, every lie, every planted seed. It wasn't enough to turn Eli against me. She wanted to destroy my reputation too. And still, I didn't fight back. Not yet. Because some part of me, some foolish flickering candle in the storm, still believed Eli would see through it all. That he'd remember the bedtime stories, the scraped knees I kissed, the lunches I packed, the tears I caught in my hand. But then came the message. Not a phone call. Not a visit. A message. Just a short email. No greeting. "Nana, I've decided to move in with Mom for now. It's better this way. I need space. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Eli, I read it 3 times, then a 4th. I stared at the cold screen until the words blurred and my eyes began to sting. No emotion, no gratitude, no goodbye. Just a digital eviction of everything we once shared. That night, I pulled out the old photo albums. I sat cross-legged on the living room rug like I had so many times when Eli was little, flipping through the pages with shaky fingers. His first birthday face smeared with frosting. His kindergarten graduation. The time we built a snowman so tall the neighbors came to take pictures. The letters he used to write me in wobbly crayon, "Nana, I love you the best. Forever and ever." I closed the album, pressed my hand to the cover, and for the first time since he left, I let myself cry. Not polite tears, not a trembling chin or a sniffle. I sobbed. I howled. Because how do you mourn someone who's still alive? In the days that followed, I moved like a ghost through my own life. I answered calls with half voices. I skipped church. I left dishes in the sink for the first time in years. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a graveyard. Every room held a memory that had now been tainted by Eli's absence. Then came the next envelope. I almost didn't open it. I wish I hadn't. Inside an official petition. From Eli's lawyer. A request for partial ownership and control of the property effective immediately. My hands trembled so violently the paper nearly tore. There it was. She had gotten to him fully. Not just emotionally, not just socially, legally. They were coming for everything, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't about space or independence. This was about power. Cynthia was doing what she'd always done: take, destroy, abandon. And now through Eli, she was trying to take the only thing I had left. But this time, I wasn't going to let her. Not without a fight. I didn't sleep the night I received the petition. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. I never drank the paper spread out in front of me like a crime scene. The words blurred in my eyes: partial ownership, financial reassignment, conflict of interest, elder coercion. Legal terms dressed up like concern when really they were weapons. I wasn't just being betrayed, I was being erased. The worst part wasn't the cold precision of the paperwork. It was knowing whose voice stood behind every phrase: smooth, persuasive, venomous. Cynthia. I could almost hear her in the lawyer's language. We're just making sure things are fair. Eli deserves autonomy. No one is taking anything from you, always said with a smile. Always while the knife was already in. I couldn't believe how quickly it had all unraveled, but maybe that was the problem. Maybe it hadn't been quick at all. Maybe Cynthia had been planting seeds for years, quietly, patiently waiting for Eli to grow old enough to doubt, old enough to be useful, old enough to weaponize against me. And maybe I had helped her without realizing it. I started going through old drawers the next morning. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe something to remind me that this house was mine, that I was the one who made Eli's life possible. Bank statements, photos, the deed, medical bills with my name, not Cynthia's, the daycare receipts, the school enrollment forms, the emergency room visits when he broke his wrist and Cynthia couldn't be bothered to call back. Every scrap of proof. I laid them out across the dining table like war maps. Then I found something I'd forgotten even existed: a letter. Eli had written it to me on my 60th birthday. He would have been 10. The handwriting was childlike and crooked misspellings everywhere. Dear Nana, you make the best pancakes. You give the best hugs. I love you more than 1,000 cakes, and even the moon. You are my real mom. Love, Eli. I pressed the paper to my chest and felt my knees go weak. How do you reconcile that child with the man now suing you? How do you make peace with the truth that love, even the truest kind, might not be enough? The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called a lawyer. Her name was Evelyn Grant. Mid-40s, sharp voice, no nonsense. Referred to me by Janet's cousin who'd gone through a messy estate battle. I explained everything, trying to keep my voice steady as I spoke. She didn't react with pity. I appreciated that. What you're describing, she said finally, is more common than you think. Family coercion, property manipulation. I see it all the time, but that doesn't make it any less vile. Do I have a chance? I asked quietly. You have more than a chance, she said. You have documentation. You have decades of care. You have truth. But you need to be ready. This won't be a gentle process. I exhaled long and slow. I'm already in the fire. I might as well stop trying to stay clean. A week later, I received a summons. Cynthia, on Eli's behalf, was officially suing for control of the house, citing emotional dependency and manipulative guardianship, suggesting I had used my position to isolate Eli from his biological mother and deprive him of his rightful inheritance. It took everything in me not to scream. Instead, I called Evelyn and faxed her every document I had. She reviewed them all. "They've built their case on sand," she told me. "But that doesn't mean they won't try to drown you." "Let them try," I said. Something had changed inside me. I had spent my whole life being the caregiver, the peacemaker, the quiet one. But this wasn't just about losing a house. This was about losing myself. One night I received another visit. Not from Cynthia. Not from Eli. From a young woman I didn't know around Eli's age. She stood on my porch, nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "Are you Maggie Alden?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Emily. I go to school with Eli. I don't know if I should be here, but..." She glanced around, then handed me the folder. Its screenshots, messages, emails, things Cynthia sent Eli. I thought, "You should see them." I opened the folder after she left. What I read made my stomach churn. Lines like, "She's using you for her ego. You owe her nothing, she manipulated you into loving her. You'd have everything if you just take what's already yours. Get her out of your way and build your life." Some were worse. Some bordered on emotional blackmail. All of them confirmed what I had feared. Cynthia had not only returned to reclaim Eli, she had poisoned him from the inside out, and he had swallowed every drop. I handed the folder to Evelyn the next morning. "This changes everything," she said, eyes scanning the messages. "This shows premeditation, undue influence, and it could flip the entire case." But it didn't make me feel better. It made me feel tired. Like I'd spent years building a sandcastle only to watch the tide swallow it. I missed Eli. Not this version of him, this bitter, distant stranger who wore his smile like a mask. I missed the boy who danced in the living room, who clung to my arm during thunderstorms, who once cried when I scraped my knee because he thought it would scar. And now he was trying to evict me from my own life. "You know," Evelyn said gently, "you don't have to go through with the trial. You could settle. Sign over partial ownership, keep living here, avoid the stress." But I shook my head. "No, if I do that, it'll never stop. I gave him everything I had, and now he wants what's left." She nodded. "Then let's fight." It was the first time in a long while I didn't feel like I was drowning. I wasn't just the betrayed grandmother anymore. I was a woman with a story, with evidence, with resolve. And Cynthia. She was about to learn what happens when the woman she underestimated finds her voice. In all my years as a teacher, a wife, a mother in all but name, I thought I had learned how to keep my composure, how to hold pain behind my eyes and speak in a calm voice, even when my heart was racing. But preparing for court, it was a different kind of battle. This wasn't about lesson plans or scraped knees or financial strain. This was about my life, my home, my dignity. And the child I raised, the one I used to cradle against my chest, was standing on the other side. Not a stranger. Worse. Someone I still loved, who no longer loved me back. Evelyn walked me through everything. She was calm and methodical, asking me questions like, "How often did you take him to medical appointments? Who paid for his school supplies? Do you have evidence of legal guardianship from those early years I did?" All of it. Receipts. Records. Legal forms. Every single thing Cynthia had ignored or neglected, I had kept in boxes in the attic. Not for legal protection back then, I didn't think I'd need it. I kept them because I was proud. Because every report card, every note from a teacher, every drawing signed, Eli felt like a little victory. But now those papers weren't just sentimental. They were proof. Still, Evelyn warned me, don't expect him to back down. He won't. Not yet. I looked at her, voice low. Why? She sighed. Because people who've been manipulated don't realize it until the damage is done. And even then, it's easier to stay angry than to face the shame. Court was set for the following month. I had just 4 weeks to brace myself. I tried to keep my routine wake early sweep. The porch read a little call, Janet. But every time I passed Eli's room, my breath caught in my throat. His door was still closed, untouched, as though he might walk back in and flop on his bed like he used to. I kept telling myself not to open it, but one night I did. The air inside was stale, the blinds half drawn. His desk was still messy, the lamp slightly tilted. I ran my fingers over his bookshelf, still filled with fantasy novels and old college brochures. Then I opened the bottom drawer of his desk. And there, tucked behind an old hoodie, I found something that made my legs go numb. A voice recorder. Small. Black. Ordinary. I clicked play. At first it was nothing. Shuffling. A chair scraping. Then came Cynthia's voice, low and silky. Don't worry, baby. I know how she talks to you when I'm not there. That's why you need this. So we have evidence. A pause. Just leave it in the living room when she's on one of her guilt trips. We'll catch her saying something manipulative, something desperate. Trust me, it's for your protection. Another pause. She's had power over you for too long, Eli. You owe her nothing. I dropped the recorder like it had burned me. So that was her game. She hadn't just whispered poison into Eli's ear. She'd tried to frame me, build a narrative, a case against me using my own words, twisted, taken out of context, spun like thread into a noose. I clutched the edge of the desk, dizzy. That wasn't just betrayal. That was premeditated cruelty. And Eli, he'd gone along with it. He'd planted that recorder in our home, waiting for me to say something he could use against me. When Evelyn heard it, she was quiet for a long time. This changes everything, she said finally. It's clear manipulation, potentially even criminal on her part. But we have to be careful. If you react emotionally in court, they'll try to paint you as unstable. I laughed, a bitter, dry sound. She sets me up like a criminal, and I have to stay calm. She looked me dead in the eye. Yes, because you're the adult in the room, and the one with something to lose. She was right. I hated that she was right. Days before the court date, I received a text from Eli. Just 4 words. Let's talk before court. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to delete it. Another part, the part that still remembered every bedtime song and every scraped knee, couldn't help but hope. I agreed to meet him. Neutral ground. A coffee shop downtown. Daylight, people around, no surprises. When I walked in, he was already there, staring into a cup he hadn't touched. His face looked tired. Paler than I remembered. His eyes didn't meet mine until I sat down. Nana, he said quietly. I waited. He cleared his throat. I just wanted to ask if we could work this out without going to court. Mom thinks. I cut him off gently but firmly. No, don't tell me what your mother thinks. Tell me what you think. He looked up at me then. Really looked. For the first time in months. I don't know anymore, he said. Everything's so confusing. I softened. Then why are you still pushing this? Why sue me? He didn't answer right away. Then, in the smallest voice I've ever heard from him, he said, because I thought you were going to take everything away from me. I blinked. Everything, Eli, I gave you. Everything. Your whole life. His voice cracked. That's what she said. That you'd use it against me. That you'd say I owed you. That you were only holding on to me out of guilt. I stared at him. My heart shattered. Do you really believe that? He hesitated. And that was my answer. I stood up. Calm, steady. You want to talk again? Talk to me in court. He didn't stop me. He didn't run after me. And as I walked away from that table, something inside me changed. The grief was still there, but the fear was gone. The courtroom awaited. And I wasn't going to show up as the broken grandmother anymore. I was going to show up as the woman who had built a life, protected a child, and refused to be erased. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror for longer than I should have. I wasn't checking my appearance out of vanity, I was looking for something. A sign that the woman staring back at me still existed beneath the years of caregiving, grief, and now betrayal. I adjusted the simple pearl earrings Gerald gave me on our 25th anniversary, smoothed the collar of my navy blouse, brushed back my silver hair. I didn't look like someone preparing for a war. I looked like someone preparing to bury what was left of a life. But this wasn't a funeral. Not yet. I had no intention of letting them bury me. Not quietly. The courthouse was colder than I expected. The hallways echoed with heels murmurs and the faint rustle of paperwork. Evelyn met me at the entrance, her usual composure wrapped tight around her like armor. She offered a nod, not warm, not cold. Just steady. "You're ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied. We walked in together. Cynthia was already seated. Designer blouse, lips, perfectly painted legs crossed with performative elegance. When she saw me, she smiled, that familiar crooked smirk she used to wear when she knew she'd gotten away with something. It hadn't changed in decades. Eli sat beside her. I had to look twice. He was wearing a suit. Ill-fitting, too big in the shoulders. Like a child dressed for a part he didn't fully understand. He didn't look at me. Not even once. I took my seat. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, entered promptly. She glanced through the documents, nodded, and asked for opening statements. Cynthia's attorney spoke first. Smooth, calculated, gentle poison laced with words like concern, entitlement, emotional dependence. They painted me as a woman who clung to Eli out of fear of abandonment, who denied him access to his real mother, who manipulated him into staying under my roof, denying him adult freedom and responsibility. I sat still, jaw tight, chest burning. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She didn't waste time. My client raised the plaintiff from birth. She provided housing, food, healthcare, education in the absence of his biological mother, who signed away her parental rights. We have receipts, we have testimony, we have legal guardianship records, and we have evidence of deliberate manipulation by Ms. Cynthia Alden. The judge raised an eyebrow. Evidence. Evelyn stepped forward and presented the file Emily had delivered: printed messages, email threads, dates, phone logs. And then, with careful hesitation, she placed the voice recorder on the bench. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, "this was recovered by my client. It records Ms. Alden coaching the plaintiff to entrap his grandmother. We submit it with great reluctance, but also with the understanding that it reveals the intent behind this case: coercion, not justice." The judge leaned back, brows furrowed. She tapped the folder once, then asked the most unexpected question: "Is the plaintiff willing to testify?" The courtroom froze. I turned finally to look at Eli. His face went pale. His mouth opened slightly. Then Cynthia whispered something into his ear. He nodded. He stood. They swore him in. I stared at the back of his head, heart pounding. He sat straight in the witness box, hands in his lap. The judge addressed him. "Eli, do you believe your grandmother manipulated or coerced you financially or emotionally?" He paused. The silence stretched like a violin string pulled too tight. "I don't know," he said at last. "She always took care of me, but I didn't ask for that. I didn't choose that." "Did she ever threaten you, withhold support unless you complied with her wishes?" "No." "Then why are you here?" He looked straight at the judge, then finally at me. "Because my mother said, if I didn't, I'd lose both of them." There it was. The lie beneath the lies. Cynthia had twisted his world so thoroughly he thought this lawsuit was his only option. "Do you regret filing the petition?" the judge asked. Another pause. "Yes," he said, and I closed my eyes. The judge ordered a recess. In the hallway, Evelyn and I sat on a wooden bench in silence. Then she said, "That helped us. A lot." I nodded, but it didn't help him. Maybe not yet. We went back in. Cynthia looked furious, her posture now rigid. She wouldn't even look at Eli. The judge resumed proceedings and requested closing statements. Evelyn kept it short. "My client isn't asking for pity. She's asking to keep what she's earned through decades of care, sacrifice, and love. That's not revenge. That's justice." Cynthia's lawyer tried to regain footing, but the damage had been done. The evidence, Eli's hesitations, the voice recordings. It was all too much to ignore. The judge excused herself to chambers. 15 long minutes later, she returned and delivered her verdict. The plaintiff's claims of emotional manipulation are unsupported. Furthermore, the court finds compelling evidence of undue influence by Ms. Cynthia Alden. The petition for partial property ownership is hereby denied. All rights and ownership remain with the defendant, Margaret Alden. It was over, and I had won. But in the moment, I didn't feel victorious. I looked at Eli, still seated beside the woman who had tried to dismantle everything we had built. And for the first time, I saw the cracks in him. The regret. The confusion. The small boy still trapped behind the eyes of a man who had made a terrible choice. The judge banged her gavel. Cynthia stood abruptly, muttering curses as she stormed out of the room. Eli hesitated. Then he stood too. He looked at me, as if he might say something, but he didn't. He followed her out, and I was left alone. Victory, when it comes at the cost of love, tastes like ash in your mouth. But I had done what I needed to do. I had defended myself. And even if I'd lost him, I hadn't lost me. For 3 days after the verdict, the house felt heavier than it had before the trial. Not quieter, it had already been too quiet for weeks, but denser. Like the walls themselves had absorbed the tension, the betrayal, the bitter finality of the courtroom. There were no congratulations from friends. No one brought flowers or casseroles like they might for a funeral or a wedding. Victory in court doesn't come with community celebration, especially not when it's against your own grandson. I didn't tell many people I had won. Not Janet, not the women at the church quilting circle. I wasn't sure what I'd say, even if I had. Yes, I kept my house, but I lost the boy I raised in it. The day after the ruling, I found myself sitting in Eli's old room, not doing anything, just sitting. The sun cut through the blinds in long, soft beams, illuminating the dust floating in the air. I stared at the posters on his wall. Half of them were faded now, a movie he'd once loved, a soccer team he hadn't followed in years. I noticed his bookshelf was still crooked, leaning a little to the right. I remembered Gerald swearing as he tried to anchor it straight when Eli was 7. Eli had cried because it wobbled. He was scared his books would fall and disappear. I told him they wouldn't, that I'd keep them safe. And now here I was. The books still here. The boy gone. The phone rang around lunchtime. I let it ring 4 times before picking up. I half hoped it would be Evelyn with some post-case paperwork to distract me, but it wasn't. It was Eli. My throat tightened before I could say a word. "Hi," he said, quiet. "Hello." A long pause. "I just wanted to see if I could come by." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down, to scream. "Now you remember me," but a deeper part, the one still scarred but not dead, whispered, "Let him speak." "What for?" I asked softly. Another pause. "I don't know," he said. "Closure. Or maybe something else." I sighed. "Fine. But not with her. Alone." "I understand. We agreed on 4 o'clock. When I hung up, I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall. I didn't know what I was preparing for. An apology, an argument, a goodbye. He arrived on time, still in the same oversized suit from court as if he hadn't changed clothes since the hearing. His face looked older suddenly, not in years in weight. Like the world had caught up to him too quickly. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. We stood in the foyer for a moment just like we used to when he was 5 and had to take his muddy shoes off before coming inside. He looked around. Smells the same. I didn't reply. He took a breath. I know you don't owe me anything. Not after what I did. Still, I said nothing. I was angry and confused. And Mom made it feel like everything in my life was her idea. Like she'd been the one who loved me all along and you were just a placeholder, I said for him. He winced. Yeah. We stood in the silence again, heavier this time. I didn't realize what she was doing until it was too late. And by then, I'd already signed things, said things, and I didn't know how to come back from it. I finally looked him in the eyes. You could have come back at any time, Eli. You just had to want to. His voice cracked. I was scared. Of me, no. Of being wrong. Of realizing that I hurt the only person who ever actually stayed. I nodded slowly. Well, now you have. Tears welled in his eyes. I don't know how to fix this. I crossed my arms, bracing myself against the pull of old emotions. I don't know that you can. He looked down. I figured. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air like wet leaves, soft, heavy, real. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small. His key. To the house. He held it out. I don't think I deserve this anymore. I took it, my fingers brushing his. It was cold. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then I asked, "Where will you go?" He shrugged. I don't know. A friend offered me a room for a while. I'll figure it out. I nodded. He turned to leave, then paused. Can I write to you? The question hit harder than I expected. I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, You can. But I don't promise I'll write back. He nodded. That's fair. And just like that, he was gone again. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, key still in my hand. I didn't cry. I'd already cried too much. But I felt something shift. Not peace, not healing. Just space. Space where hurt had lived. Space where anger had burned. Now there was only quiet. And maybe that was the first step back to myself. The letter arrived 2 weeks later. There was no return address, just my name written in the familiar scrawl I'd once taught him to form with chubby fingers over lined paper. Eli. I stared at the envelope for a full hour before opening it. I set it on the kitchen table, walked past it, came back, touched it, walked away again. I'd told him he could write, and he had. But now that the moment was here, I wasn't sure if I wanted to read it. What if it reopened everything I was just beginning to close? What if it said everything I wanted to hear, and I couldn't forgive him anyway? What if it was too late? But eventually, as the sun dipped low behind the curtain, I sat down with a cup of tea and carefully broke the seal. Nana, I don't expect you to respond. I just needed to write this for me, for you, for the parts of myself I can't look in the mirror without remembering. I've been staying in a friend's spare room. It's cold, quiet. I'm back to eating microwave dinners and thinking too much at night. Which is what I deserve, I guess. I keep remembering the little things. Your pancakes on Saturday mornings. The way you'd warm my shoes by the radiator on winter days before school. You never told me how tired you were, or how hard it must have been to raise someone else's child alone. I let someone twist that love into something else. I let her poison the one safe place I ever had. And I did nothing to stop it. I don't know who I am right now. but I know that whatever I become, it will be shaped by you. Even if I lost the right to stand in your house again, I'm sorry for everything. Love, Eli. The paper trembled in my hands as I folded it back. The tea had gone cold again. I didn't mind. It was a quiet kind of heartbreak, not the sharp pain of the trial or the bitterness of betrayal. This was different. This was the ache that comes from seeing the seeds of guilt finally bloom in someone you once raised to be better. And in spite of myself, I felt something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. I didn't write back. Not then. Instead, I pulled down the old box from the hall closet, the one marked, Eli, keep forever. Inside were the birthday cards, the stick figure drawings, the macaroni necklace he made me in 2nd grade. A science fair ribbon he'd won in 5th grade. A small rock he once swore was from the moon. I laid them out on the table one by one. Memories, yes, but more than that. Proof. Proof that love once given doesn't vanish. It lingers. It waits. Sometimes it even returns. But whether or not I opened the door to him again, that decision was mine. Not Cynthia's. Not the court's. Mine. Spring came late that year. The flowers in the front yard bloomed slowly, cautious, as if waiting for a sign it was safe to stretch upward. I understood that hesitation. I was doing the same. I went back to church. Sat in the back pew, didn't talk much. But I was there. I made coffee for Janet again. We sat on the porch, mostly in silence, watching cars pass like old women watching time itself roll by. And slowly, day by day, I made my peace. Not with Eli. Not entirely. But with the truth I had done right by him. Even if he chose wrong. Even if he came back too late. I had raised him with love. With strength. With sacrifice. And no lawsuit. No betrayal. No lie could ever take that away from me. One afternoon I found myself back in Eli's room. I opened the window. Let the breeze in. And for the first time in months, I picked up one of his old books. On the first page, in messy handwriting, he'd written, "This belongs to Elijah Alden. If found, please return to Nana because she always knows where I am." I smiled. A real smile. Then I closed the book and walked out of the room, leaving the window open behind me. It was the butter that made me stop. That sounds silly, I know. But there I was, standing in front of the dairy fridge at the market, hand hovering over a familiar yellow box, when I realized it had been over a year since I last bought Eli's favorite brand. He always swore it tasted better on toast. As a boy, he'd sneak into the kitchen before dinner and swipe a chunk to eat plain like cheese. I used to scold him for it, lovingly, of course. "You'll spoil your appetite," I'd say. He'd grin, mouth full. And now I stood staring at that box like it had been dropped from the sky. A relic. A reminder. A wound. I placed it gently into the cart. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because part of me missed the way it softened on the countertop, the way it smelled with cinnamon toast. Maybe because it made me feel, just for a moment, like something wasn't gone. Or maybe I was tired of pretending that the past didn't still live in small corners of my life. As I turned the corner toward the produce, I nearly collided with a cart. "Oh, sorry," I said, instinctively stepping back. "No, it's my fault," the woman said, smiling politely. Then she looked up. And I froze. Cynthia. Her smile faltered only for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. The tightening of her jaw. The flicker of something sharp behind her eyes. But she recovered quickly, slipping on that syrupy tone like a silk scarf. "Well," she said, cool and composed. "This is unexpected." I didn't move. "Is it?" She gave a shrug, glanced at the butter in my cart. "Still buying that brand, I see. Some things never change." I said nothing. She stepped closer, as if we were old friends chatting over oranges. "I hear Eli's doing well," she said. "He got a new job. Pays well. He's thinking of going back to school." I raised my eyebrows. Good for him. Cynthia tilted her head. You know he misses you. He won't say it out loud, of course. He's too proud. But I can tell. I bit the inside of my cheek. You told him I was controlling, that I manipulated him, that I robbed him of his choices, I said, keeping my voice level. You convinced him to betray me. And now what, you want to play mediator? She gave a laugh, light but cold. Please, Maggie, don't be so dramatic. He made his own decisions. No, I said, stepping forward. He made yours. Her smile wavered again. And for what it's worth, I continued, he's starting to realize that. She scoffed. You really think one letter makes up for everything? No, I said. But at least it was honest. That did it. The mask slipped just slightly. Her lips tightened and her eyes narrowed. I raised him, I added. When you walked away. I stayed. I fed him. I taught him how to tie his shoes. Read a book cry, without shame. I built a life while you chased whatever was next. Cynthia stepped back, her voice dropping. You don't know the full story. Maybe not, I replied. But I know mine. And I know the part where I held him while he cried for a mother who wouldn't call. We stood there in silence, aisle 12, surrounded by green apples and shrink-wrapped cucumbers. Finally, she said, he won't come back, you know. Not really. Not the way you want him to. I looked at her steady. Maybe not. But if he ever does, it won't be because of you. And then I walked away. I didn't look back. At home, I unpacked the groceries slowly. I set the butter on the counter just like I used to. Let it soften. And for the first time in a long while, I made cinnamon toast. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Later that week, I received another letter from Eli, shorter this time. Nana, I'm not expecting you to forgive me, but I'm working on forgiving myself. I hope you're well. P.S. I miss your cinnamon toast. Love, Eli. I didn't write back, but I made another slice the next morning. I left it on the porch table with a napkin just in case someone walked by. It started with a flyer at the community center. I was there to donate a few old coats things Eli had long outgrown, but I hadn't had the heart to let go of. On the bulletin board near the entrance, among the usual postings about lost cats and weekend yard sales, was a simple sheet of paper. Seeking senior mentors for local youth support program, ages 13-18, weekly check-ins, light academic help. You've lived through so much, come share it. Contact Riverdale, Youth Outreach. I stood there holding an old green hoodie in my hands and read it again. I almost laughed. Me, a mentor, I could barely navigate my own family, let alone guide someone else's child. What wisdom could I possibly offer now? But then I remembered a little boy once small enough to fit in the crook of my arm who used to call me his real mom. And I remembered how no one had shown up for him, not at first. So I took the flyer. I didn't commit right away. I called, asked a few questions. The woman on the other end, Carla, had a voice like warm coffee and worn denim, practical kind, not overly sweet. We match teens with elders who can offer support, she explained. It's not counseling, it's just presence, encouragement, a little help with school if you're up for it, someone to listen. You'd meet once a week. I hesitated. What if I'm not very good at it? She laughed gently. Most of our volunteers say that. You'd be surprised what a steady presence means to a kid who doesn't have one. I told her I'd think about it, but when I hung up, I already knew I would say yes. 2 weeks later, I met Jordan. He was 15, tall for his age, with unruly curls and a guarded look in his eye that reminded me so much of Eli it made my breath catch. Carla introduced us in a small sunlit room at the outreach center. The walls were lined with books and posters about self-esteem. A jar of jelly beans sat on the windowsill. Jordan didn't shake my hand, didn't smile, just nodded, backpack slung low over one shoulder. Hi, I said, offering nothing more than that. He shrugged. Hey. We sat in silence for a minute. I didn't rush to fill it. I'd learned better than that. Eventually I asked, "Do you like math?" He snorted. "I like when it's over." I smiled. That makes two of us. Over the next month we met every Wednesday. At first our conversations barely stretched beyond homework, which he loathed, and music, which he loved. But little by little he opened up. Told me about his mom working two jobs, his little sister who still believed in monsters, his dad who lived in another state and called once a month. And one day, out of nowhere, he said, "You remind me of my grandma. She died last year. I lived with her for a bit." I paused. "Did you like living with her?" He nodded. "She made grilled cheese with real butter. Not that fake spray stuff, and she always let me talk about dumb things." I smiled. "That's not dumb. That's life." He looked at me, then really looked. And I realized that even if I couldn't reach Eli anymore, I could still reach someone. One night after our meeting, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out another old recipe card, grilled cheese Nana style, scrawled in Eli's childhood handwriting. I'd kept it tucked behind the cake recipes. I made one, then wrapped it in foil. The next week, I handed it to Jordan as he left. He blinked. "What's this? Your homework reward?" He grinned. "Smells better than algebra." I watched him walk down the steps of the center with the sandwich in hand, and for the first time in months I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Pride, not for surviving, but for choosing not to shrink. Not after court. Not after betrayal. Not even after loss. I still had something to give, even if the one I gave everything to had walked away. Later that evening I found myself at the mailbox. There was another letter. Same handwriting. Smaller envelope. "Nana, I saw your name on the Riverdale Bulletin. I think it's great. Helping other kids. You always were good at that. If you ever need help with anything there, I'd like to come. Just to help. Not to intrude. I know I've used up all my chances, but maybe you can let me try earning one back. Love, Eli." I pressed the envelope to my lips and whispered, "Maybe." The phone rang just after dusk on a Saturday evening. I almost didn't answer. I was halfway through ironing pillowcases, something I still did out of habit, even though no one but me ever noticed when the shrill tone sliced through the quiet. I walked to the kitchen, wiped my hands, and picked up the receiver like it might bite me. "Hello?" There was a pause. "Then it's me." I didn't ask who. I didn't have to. Eli's voice had changed over the years, deeper, more measured, but there was a rhythm to it I knew by heart. Even now. "I got your letter," I said quietly. "Yeah," he replied. "I wasn't sure if I should send it, or if you'd read it." I did. Another pause. "I meant it," he added. I could hear something in his tone. Not nerves exactly, more like restraint. Like he was trying not to hope too much. He cleared his throat. Would it be okay if I stopped by, just to see the porch again?" My instinct, sharpened by months of heartbreak and rebuilding, said no. But then I thought about the foil-wrapped sandwich I'd handed to Jordan, about the way a small act of kindness can unearth things you thought were gone forever. I thought about Eli at 6 sobbing when I left him at school for the first time. I thought about Eli at 15 staying up late to help me program the new microwave because the buttons confused me. I thought about Eli, my grandson, not the man from court. Not the stranger who walked away. "All right," I said. He didn't thank me. He just said, "I'll be there in 10. I had time to make tea, but I didn't. I had time to prepare a tray of shortbread, his favorite, but I didn't do that either. This wasn't a visit for comfort. This was something else. I turned on the porch light and waited. When his car pulled up, I watched him step out slowly, as if each motion required permission. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, hands tucked deep into his pockets. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hi," he said, voice small. "Come on," I replied. You said you wanted to see the porch. He nodded and followed me outside. We sat in the same wooden chairs Gerald had built years ago, paint peeling slightly at the edges now. The cushions were faded, the table between us stained with years of coffee mugs and sun. We sat in silence for a full minute. Finally, he said, "It hasn't changed." "No," I said. "It hasn't." He glanced around, then down at his hands. "I think about this place all the time," he said. "Especially the mornings, when the sun would hit the railing just right and you'd sit out here with your tea." I didn't respond. "I wanted to write more," he said, "but I didn't want to keep pushing." "You didn't push," I said flatly. "Not this time." He looked over. "I was a coward, Nana. I let her get in my head. I let her twist what I knew was true." "Yes," I said. "You did." He flinched. I didn't soften it. "But," I added, "you were also a boy who wanted to believe his mother loved him, and I can't blame you for wanting that." His eyes filled. "She did love me in her way." "Maybe," I said. "But she didn't raise you." He looked down again. "I know." We sat for another minute. I remember he said how you used to tuck notes into my lunchbox. Little jokes, quotes. "You are more than enough." Stuff like that. I smiled faintly. "You always acted like you hated them." I didn't. I kept a bunch. Still have them in a box. Labeled Nana's Weird Wisdom. A soft laugh escaped me. "I was angry," he said. "So angry. But I think most of that anger wasn't even about you. It was about feeling like I didn't know who I was. Like everything I believed about my life had been rewritten behind my back." I nodded. "That's fair." He turned toward me. "But it wasn't your fault. You didn't rewrite anything. You protected me. You kept me alive." A breeze stirred the trees and the porch light flickered slightly. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a second. "I've started therapy," he said. I blinked. "You have, yeah." "One of the guys at work recommended someone. I didn't think it would help, but it's helped. A little." "That's good." He took a breath. "She said something that stuck with me." The therapist. She said, "Love without boundaries isn't love, it's captivity." And that sometimes when we realize someone loved us without holding us hostage, it hurts more, because we realize we betrayed something pure. He turned to me, eyes glassy. "You never made me stay. You never controlled me. And I left anyway." I let his words sit. "Do you forgive me?" he asked softly. I stared at the stars above the roofline. They looked like tiny pinholes in a heavy curtain. "I don't know yet," I said. "Some days I think I do. Other days I still wake up angry." He nodded. "That's fair too. But I know I still love you," I added. "Even if I never let you back into my life the same way?" His shoulders slumped as if something heavy had been released from him. Not relief. Acceptance. "I'm not asking for the same thing," he said. "I'm just asking for a place to start again. Even if it's just the porch." I looked at him. My boy. My grown, battered, aching boy. "I suppose the porch is a good place to start," I said. He smiled, a small, broken thing. We sat a little longer listening to the wind move through the trees. And for the first time in a long, long time, there was no need to speak. Eli didn't come inside that night, and I didn't invite him. But he left something behind, a single folded page from a notebook. It was tucked under the planter on the porch when I came out the next morning. On it was a list. A short one. Things I want to do. Write help. Fix the garden bed. Take Nana to lunch, her pick. Return her books I borrowed. Ask about her favorite childhood memory. Learn her cinnamon toast trick. Listen more than I talk. It wasn't grand. It wasn't flowery. But it was honest. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my recipe box between Thanksgiving stuffing, Gerald's favorite, and Eli's pancake mix. That was the first day I felt something softening inside me. Not healing, not yet, but softening. Like the thaw that comes just before spring truly breaks. Over the next few weeks, Eli kept his distance, but not his silence. He'd call, sometimes short, careful calls. Need me to pick anything up from the market I drove by the school today? They've painted it blue. I was thinking about the time I locked myself in the bathroom and you bribed me out with pudding. I never said much, but I didn't hang up either. And then, one Saturday, he showed up with gloves and mulch and a bag of tools. I thought I'd fix the flower bed out front, he said, holding up a rusted spade like an offering. You remember how I asked? He grinned sheepishly. Not really, but I figured you could yell at me until I get it right. I laughed despite myself. We worked side by side in the dirt for hours. He asked questions. I gave instructions. And slowly, between planting begonias and pulling weeds, something unspoken started to knit between us again. Not a full repair, but a beginning. It was the third weekend of these small shared tasks when I found the envelope. I wasn't looking for anything. I was digging through the hallway closet trying to find an old gardening apron for Eli when a manila folder slid off the top shelf. It had no label, just a slight tear at the corner. Curious, I opened it. Inside were printed emails not addressed to me but to Eli. From Cynthia. Over 40 messages, dated months before the court case, all carefully preserved. My heart pounded as I read the subject lines. She's lying to you, Eli. Don't let her poison your mind. Your grandmother is not the victim she pretends to be. The content was worse, twisting stories from his childhood, insinuating abuse where there was none, suggesting he'd been robbed of opportunity, love, even autonomy. There was even a spreadsheet, her calculation of how much money I'd stolen by raising him. It wasn't just manipulation, it was warfare. And Eli had kept them. All of them. He'd saved these digital daggers, printed, cataloged, hidden. I sat back on the floor, the folder resting on my lap. Tears welled in my eyes, not from the words on the page, but from what they meant. He had held on to the lies, even after the trial, even after the porch, even after the mulch and the laughter and the toast. He had kept them, and not shown me. That night, I didn't answer when he called. I didn't reply to the text either. Hey, just checking if you want me to come by tomorrow. I found that old birdhouse we painted when I was 8. Figured we could fix it up. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I didn't know what I felt. Betrayal, grief, shame. I thought we were rebuilding brick by careful brick. But now it felt like I'd stepped onto a floor that still had cracks running deep beneath the carpet. And maybe I had. Maybe he wasn't fully free of her yet. The next morning, I called Evelyn. Not because I wanted legal advice, I didn't. I just needed someone who had seen me at my worst. Someone who didn't see me as Nana, but as Maggie. The woman who had fought tooth and nail to keep her dignity. When she answered, I asked, "How do you know when to let someone back in, really in, and not just at the porch?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When you stop fearing what they're still hiding." I thanked her, hung up, sat with that answer. I didn't stop fearing it. Not yet. But I also didn't throw the folder away. I placed it unopened again on the porch table with a note. You left something behind. If you want to earn your way in, you start by explaining this. Then I locked the door behind me. It was nearly sunset when I heard footsteps on the porch. I didn't get up right away. I stayed seated in my armchair by the window, watching the light change on the floorboards as the orange hue of dusk bled into gray. I could see the outline of him, tall, still holding the manila folder like it was burning his hands. He didn't knock. He didn't call my name. He just stood there and waited. After a long minute, I opened the door. I didn't speak. I didn't invite him in. He held out the folder. I found it again last night. I thought I'd thrown them away. I leaned against the doorframe. You didn't. He swallowed. No. Silence stretched between us like wire. Finally I said, "Why'd you keep them?" His answer didn't come quickly. He looked down, fingers twitching around the folder's edge, because I wasn't sure what to believe he said. Even after everything court therapy there was a part of me that still wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. That maybe I'd missed something. That maybe you had taken something from me. The words sliced deep. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply asked. And now he looked up. His eyes were different, not defensive, not pleading, just tired. Now I know that what she took from me was you, and I helped her do it. My arms were crossed, but my fingers were trembling. Then why didn't you tell me you'd kept them if we were rebuilding something real? He stepped closer, cautious, respectful of the invisible line between us. Because I was ashamed, and afraid that if you knew I hadn't let go, you'd stop trying. I was never trying to fix you, Eli. He nodded. I know. You were trying to protect yourself. I didn't understand that until recently. I gestured toward the folder in his hand, and now I'm done with her. For good. I sent her a letter. Told her I don't want contact anymore. My breath caught just for a moment. She's still my mother, he added softly. But that doesn't mean she gets to keep breaking me or you. His voice cracked. And I can't ask you to trust me again. Not fully. Not yet. But I wanted to be honest about what was left. He placed the folder gently on the porch table. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out something else, a small worn photograph. I found this in my desk, he said. It was tucked behind an old binder. I don't even remember putting it there. He handed it to me. It was a photo I hadn't seen in years. Me and Eli at the park, both laughing. He must have been 7 or 8. My hand was on his shoulder, his head tilted toward mine, the sun behind us caught in his curls like a halo. I don't remember what we were laughing about, he said, but I remember feeling safe. I stared at the image, my throat tight. I don't know how to be that boy again, he continued, but I'd like to try being someone you can love without regret. I looked at him for a long time, not at the man I'd fought in court, not at the confused, wounded adult manipulated into cruelty, but at my grandson, at the boy who used to sneak butter and cry over broken birdhouses, at the boy who wrote, "You are more than enough" in shaky crayon letters and taped them to my fridge. And then I said the hardest thing of all. "I'll unlock the door," I whispered. "But you have to be the one to come in." He nodded once. "I will," he said. And then quietly he walked down the steps. He didn't come in that day. But I left the door unlocked, just in case. The door stayed unlocked for 3 days. I didn't expect him to walk through it right away. And part of me didn't want him to. Rebuilding something fragile doesn't start with dramatic gestures. It starts with silence, with stillness, with the quiet promise that this time you'll move slower. On the morning of the 4th day, I was in the kitchen kneading dough cinnamon rolls because I needed something warm in the air when I heard the porch creak. I didn't turn, didn't run to greet him. I just kept working palms, pressing gently into the soft dough like I had done for decades. A few minutes later, I heard the door open, then close, footsteps in the hallway, and then, "Do you still want help with that birdhouse?" I looked up. Eli stood there, not on the porch, not outside the window of my life, but inside. In the home I'd raised him in. In the house we'd both tried so hard to escape, only to realize it had been holding us all along. I nodded once. "Let's work in the back," I said. He followed me without a word. And just like that, we began again. There's a strange peace that comes after pain no longer surprises you. It's not happiness. Not in the clean, joyful sense. It's something quieter. A kind of knowing. A kind of strength that comes from having already lived through the thing you thought would break you. I've learned that you can love someone with everything you have, and they can still leave. You can pour years into a person and still watch them vanish with your name in their mouth like a curse. You can survive betrayal and still miss them. And yet, you can begin again. Maybe not the same. Maybe not with the same shape to your heart. But you can. Eli comes by now every Sunday. He never assumes, never walks in uninvited. But he knocks. He waits. He brings coffee. Sometimes we talk about nothing at all. Sometimes we talk about Cynthia. Sometimes we don't talk at all. But we sit on the porch together. And that's enough for now. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you raised, someone you loved so completely that you forgot to protect yourself, I see you. If you're still holding the grief like it's your fault, let it go. If you're still waiting for them to say, "I'm sorry," in the way you needed, hear it from me. You didn't deserve it. And you did the best you could. If you're still keeping your door locked out of fear, that's okay. But one day, only when you are ready, you may leave it unlocked. Just for a little while. And maybe just, maybe, someone who once lost their way might finally choose to come in. Thank you for listening to my story.